All right, so we start talking about motion picture exhibition. So remember, exhibition are buying content, at least for a short period of time, right? They license content from a distributor. So it's an oligopsony, right? It's an oligopsony. It's not an oligopoly, it's an oligopsony. So again, because they are buying content from a distributor. The distributors are the oligopoly and the exhibitors are the oligopsony. Right, so hopefully you don't get that mixed up. I know it's kind of confusing a little bit, but here we go. So what is the name of the original theaters? They were called Nickelodeons originally because essentially these venues would charge a nickel, right, for you to go into the theater to watch, a short film. And so again, the original name of the theater was a Nickelodeon. Adolf Zukar is a really important person. He was the head of Paramount Pictures for a long period of time. He was the first person to essentially vertically integrate the industries. In other words, Paramount was one of the first studios, well, was the first studio to control production, distribution, exhibition. So they controlled production, distribution, and exhibition. So they controlled making their movies, they distributed their own movies, and they would distribute their movies into their own theaters. And so he also pioneered something called block booking, which is going to come back to haunt the studios. But block booking essentially meant that if you wanted one Paramount movie, you had to take them all, right? You didn't have a choice as an exhibitor. So again, Adolf Zukar, first person to vertically integrate the industry from production all the way to exhibition. He is the guy credited for pioneering block booking, which at the time was, brilliant, but then later on, it's going to get the industry into trouble. So U.S. versus Paramount Pictures is a Supreme Court case where essentially the studios are forced to sell off a part of their business. They're no longer allowed to vertically integrate. So it ended vertical integration of the studios. And so this is a little bit about the Paramount case.
Known as the Paramount case, the first blow was in 1938 when the Justice Department sued the 5 major studios and ordered them to stop block booking and blind bidding.
Basic idea of the Paramount case was that the big studios were engaged in monopolistic practices involving distribution of films, involving control over theaters. And what the Supreme Court was looking into was the set of practices that the studios were engaged in. Were these practices creating monopolies, or were they tending to create monopolies?
Block booking is forcing theater owners to buy packages of movies containing mediocre films in order to get the hit films.
Block booking is really no different than what we have today called bundling. In other words, they bundle cable with internet, with telephone, and they call it bundle. Now, maybe you're not forced to take all 3 of those things, but 50 channels and you really only want 1 cable channel or 5 cable channels, and yet you're forced to take all these other ones. You can't pick your channels a la carte in any kind of a competitive manner where the channels would compete with each other. You basically have to take the whole package of channels. If you wanted Gone with the Wind, you had to take Angry Red Planet or a bunch of other movies that you really didn't want to watch.
Blind bidding is forcing theaters to buy these same packages sight unseen. The suit was partially resolved in 1940 with a consent decree, which allowed the government to reinstate the suit if the studios didn't comply. Unfortunately, the studios did not comply, and in 1943 the case went back to trial and was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court by 1948.
The Supreme Court was looking into the question of whether vertical integration between the producers of movies and the distributors of movies, the exhibitors of movies, if you will, the theaters, were creating a monopoly situation.
Here, the High Court affirmed most of the consent decree's terms, but also ordered the movie moguls to sell their theaters. This single action by the U.S. government, known as divestiture, destroyed the Hollywood studio system and thus ended the golden age of Hollywood. Since the studios were never again able to reliably sell their product, they were never again able to reliably contract talented new writers, actors, directors, producers, or production crews with steady employment.
Here's a conspiracy theory for you. You know, Mel Gibson would even love this one. Edison and Henry Ford got together and basically either instigated or nursed along the Justice Department's Paramount case. Edison and Ford may have been a little jealous of the movie moguls, and it's well-known fact that the Eastern establishment was pretty anti-Semitic back in these days. So Edison and Ford may have had something to do with the Justice Department's consent decree.
Here is a perfect example of the unintended consequences of government destroying the delicate economy of an entire industry.
Free market economists look at the antitrust laws and say the antitrust laws themselves are an attempt to limit free market activity in an unjustifiable way from an economic point of view.
The movie moguls had their theaters, their showrooms, chopped off in the name of the evils of vertical integration. Edison and Ford, on the other hand, still had their showrooms for their products, their record players and automobiles. Even though the 1940s saw some great movies, The Philadelphia Story, Fantasia, Grapes of Wrath, Citizen Kane, Casablanca, It's a Wonderful Life, 12 O'Clock High, the Hollywood studios were headed for still more icebergs. After World War II, television burst upon the scene, and by 1950, this new invention fostered a serious drop in movie ticket sales.
Television took a lot of people out of theaters and left them sitting at home watching television. The feature film, was still the bailiwick of the film of the theater. But after the introduction of television, there were less short films and other, non-feature works that were done in Hollywood to be exhibited in theaters.
The movie moguls reacted by circling the wagons and initiating massive liquidations. First, they sold off their priceless collections of props and wardrobes from 50 years of movies that had changed Americans forever. Then they sold off their real estate. Back lots where movies like Sunset Boulevard, High Noon, White Christmas, Oklahoma, Bridge on the River Kwai, and Ben-Hur were filmed. Add to these sad events the escalating massive unemployment due to the breakup of the studio system, and Hollywood talent, staff, and crews were desperate.
So as you can see, huge impact from the ruling of this particular case. Again, the United States, right, beats the Paramount Pictures in the Supreme Court case. So the courts ruled that the studios essentially were using illegal practices, as I mentioned before. Block booking and blind bidding was illegal, yet they continued to do it. And so essentially the government forced the studios to sell off a portion of their business. The studios sold off the exhibition part of their business, wise move. So moving on to AMC. AMC, and specifically a guy by the name of Stanley Durwood. So AMC originally started over in Kansas City, and were founded by the Durwood family, and they have been trendsetters in the industry historically, at least here in the United States. So they were the first to essentially develop stadium seating in multiplexes and megaplexes. And so for me, that's awesome because I'm not very tall, but when I was a little kid, right, sometimes you get stuck sitting behind somebody who was pretty tall and you couldn't see, because back when I used to watch movies when I was a kid, they didn't have stadium seating. So stadium seating for me and anybody who's not very tall became sort of a godsend, because now you can see over a person's head. So that was essentially AMC created the idea of, or innovated the idea of stadium seating inside of theaters. They also introduced a cup holder, which was pretty cool. You can set your soda right down, right here on the chair. You could hold it there so you wouldn't spill it. Because again, when I was a little kid, sometimes I'd kick my soft drink and there it goes all over the floor. And so the cup holder, saves a lot of stains on the floor, for sure. They also created the idea of offsetting starting times. So the importance of this is the following, right? Instead of having all the movies start at 7 o'clock, and then there's no way that the snack bar can sort of, handle all those people at the same time, they offset the starting time. So they would start one movie, let's say at 7, one at 7:15, one at 7:30, maybe one at 7:40. So the point of offsetting the times was that you have a steady flow of customers coming up to the snack bar to buy concessions, and you can more readily handle all these customers in a very effective and efficient manner, as opposed to trying to take care of all of them at one time. So again, they created the idea of offsetting starting times for films. And they are the world's largest IMAX theater owner as well. IMAX, if you watch a movie in IMAX, it's a completely different experience than watching it just on a regular screen. So the movie rating system. So the movie rating system started in 1968. And please remember this part, right? Yes, the movie rating system is under the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, but the actual subhead that actually rates the content of movies is called CARA, Classifications and Ratings Administration. So Classifications and Ratings Administration, that is the portion of the MPAA that actually rates the movie. So I'm not sure how many people are a part of CARA, but these individuals sit down and they watch movies and they rate movies, right? And I don't think they're even professionals. They're just a bunch of random people that live in the San Fernando Valley that, rate the content. And so essentially for each and every film, according to these guidelines, right, has to have a clear explanation of the rating system, of the rating. So why exactly is it rated, G versus PG versus R, right? And right now, one of the sort of topic of debate, or at least was going on before the pandemic struck, was this idea of, should a film be automatically given an R rating because it has a scene with smoking or a smoking scene? So that was a question. I don't know nothing's happened with that yet, but that was a topic of discussion. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future. So here's an example of the rating system fully explained.
Let us explain about UF movie ratings. This will help you choose what movie may or may not be right for certain audiences.
Rated G means the movie is appropriated for all ages.
Oh boy, that means we can all see the movie and not be offended.
Rated PG, some scenes may be inappropriate for children.
Like, grown-ups should know more about that movie before, taking any kids to see it.
Rated PG-13 means there are materials that may not be appropriate for children under 13. So parents must take strong caution about bringing children to this movie.
Rated R, no one under 17 is admitted without parents.
That means the movie contains scenes not fit for young adults 17 and under without parent supervision.
Rated NC-17 is adult content and nobody under 18 is admitted. This movie is for adults only. No children aged 17 and under are allowed.
Don't even think about explaining this one.
Oh man, that's not fair.
Kind of funny, but again, the rating system, again, is supposed to fully explain why a film is given a certain rating. Please remember the fact that NC-17 is the newest of the ratings, right, under CARA. And before that, I believe it was PG-13. I think was started in 1984. I think it was a Steven Spielberg movie that caused that sort of new rating to occur. So again, NC-17 is the newest rating under the American rating system that started in 1968. And remember that I don't know if you have taken a history of film class, but essentially the production code later becomes our current rating system. So the production code was a code where essentially movies had to follow these rules in terms of how they were produced in order for them to receive a theatrical distribution. And so in the 1960s, the production code becomes part of the current rating system that we practice, and we've practiced since 1968. But again, the original rating system was called the production code. All right, so a little bit about motion picture exhibition. The definition of a multiplex is 4 screens or more. So again, the definition of a multiplex is 4 screens or more. The definition of a megaplex is 16 screens or more. So again, it's 16 screens or more for a megaplex. So as you see here, in the exhibition industries, there's 40,998 US screens, and I believe this counts indoor screens as well as drive-ins as of 2020. And there's certainly too many, or the market's oversaturated. So what I mean by that is that in many cases in the exhibition industry in the United States, you have an older venue that's pretty close to a newer venue. And so what ends up happening when you have too many screens, or it's oversaturated, is people drive by the older venues and they go to the newer venues because obviously they want the experience of a newer venue, which makes sense. Also, there's too many screens in a sense that they're too cluttered in one specific area or in specific areas. So if you think about Ontario, I don't know how many of you live out in the Ontario area or have been to Ontario. I mean, there's literally, I think there's 20 screens outside in a movie theater outside of the mall. And I think inside the mall, there's an AMC that I think has 24 screens, maybe even more than that. The point that I'm trying to make is that you have about 40 screens at least, if not more, located right next to each other. Really isn't necessary, or there really isn't a need to have 40 screens in that one specific location. And so the industry, at least in the United States, there's too many screens for our population. So ticket sales obviously have plummeted because of COVID-19. And so I don't know if they will rebound to the levels they were before COVID. I think they will eventually, but in the near future, the motion picture industries, at least the exhibition side, is going to be hurting for a while. And it's unfortunate because the exhibition industry has spent a lot of money in renovating its theaters. And so that led to some revenue gains in terms of the entire industry. The fact that they renovated the theaters to essentially, they shrunk the number of seats in the theaters. So they removed all the old seats and they put in these newer reclining seats to improve the experience of moviegoers. And that went over really well prior to COVID, of course. And again, it's unfortunate that COVID struck, and now the exhibition industry, which spent all this money in renovations, especially has now experienced a huge dip in revenue because of this. Now, AMC made a deal with Universal, and this has been sort of a game changer in terms of the movie industry. So historically speaking, the theater industry has about between a 60 to 90 day window. In other words, the first 2 or 3 months the window for a movie is usually the theaters, the exhibition. And so very recently, AMC and Universal have made a new deal. It's a 17-day deal. So again, it's a 17-day deal, which essentially means AMC has the rights, the exclusive rights to play a Universal film for the first 17 days. And then after that, Universal has the option to remove the movie out of AMC theaters and stream it on their streaming service. And I believe they're going to charge, I should say on their video on demand. They're going to create a video on demand market, and I think it's $20 for a 48 hour buy. And however many people buy the VOD, the video on demand, AMC will get a portion of that revenue. The people who may not have gone to watch the movie during those first 17 days, but wanted to watch it through some sort of streaming service or on video on demand. And so now AMC is going to make revenue off of that as well. So there's essentially AMC and Universal are going to be video on demand partners after the 17-day window closes, for however many days or weeks they agree upon for each film. So that's going to change the exhibition industry in a very significant way, because AMC tends to be the pioneer in the motion picture exhibition industry. So this is a little bit more about this 17-day deal.
Hi, Wilf. It's a historic deal rewriting the rules of the movie industry. Theater giant AMC Entertainment Group and CNBC's sister company Universal Filmed Entertainment Group have agreed to dramatically shorten the exclusive theatrical window. Now, under this new multi-year deal, AMC will have access to all Universal Pictures and Focus films for at least 3 weekends, 17 days, down from the prior standard of about 88 days. Now, after that shortened window, Universal can then distribute the films via premium video on demand. It's been offering its movies for $20 for a 48-hour window, and AMC will get a percentage cut of revenue from that premium video on demand revenue through the duration of the traditional theatrical window. Now, Universal will choose on a case-by-case basis whether to offer movies on demand after 3 weekends. The two companies saying this new flexibility ensures the future of the movie industry. And this is definitely a dramatic move, and it was prompted by Universal offering its films on demand during COVID while theaters are closed. Wilf, back over to you.
Julia, so is Universal saying they're only ever going to use AMC theaters at all in the first place?
No, so the issue before, Wilf, is that AMC was so concerned about Universal offering its films on demand, perhaps even the same day that a film was in theaters, that they said they wouldn't show their films at all. Now AMC will show those films and will get a percentage of the revenue once they start offering the films on demand. But Universal will continue to distribute their films through the other theater chains as well. But Wilf, we could expect other theater chains to follow with similar deals, if only because AMC is the largest of the theater chains. So really setting a standard for the rest of the industry.
And shows a sign of the times, I guess. A number of times Adam Aaron has been on in the last couple of years saying that he would never agree to something like this, but sort of being forced by the environment to go along with it. Julia, thank you very much for that. AMC moving higher in after hours.
So it's a huge shift in the industry as the window for exhibition appears to be shrinking to 17 days. It seems like a drastic change in the industry, which it is, but you have to consider and bear in mind that most movies make the vast majority of their revenue during the first 3 weeks anyways. So it's not going to be a huge hit for the for necessarily the distributors, but for the exhibition industry, it might hurt them a little bit. It's gonna change the way deals are constructed in terms of licensing, in terms of how they split the revenue during those first 3 weeks. So in that part, it is a shift, because generally speaking, the theaters make the vast majority of their film rental after the first 3 weeks. So big change in the industry. So the trade organization within the industry is the National Association of Theater Owners, or NATO. It is a trade organization that lobbies on behalf of the industry. So for instance, the NATO has been very much trying to appeal to the federal government, trying to make sure that the federal government gives loans, for instance, to movie theaters, as movie theaters have been forced to shut down during COVID, those sorts of things. So that is the trade organization for the theater industry. So that might work. I might put it into one of those, either a hybrid or maybe just an art theater, and maybe in some mainstream theaters, right? Okay, here is the revenue and the market share. So as you can see, the industry, the Cineworld, made a little bit more box office revenue than AMC. The market shares, as you can see here, Cineworld has 25%, 25.2%. AMC has at 20.3%, and Cinemark is at 12.6%. And so because the top three companies own over 57% of the industry, the market itself is an oligopoly. So again, the exhibition industry is an oligopoly. It's controlled by a handful of companies. And so, as you can see here also, the amount of money that was made by the exhibitors in 2020 was a huge drop from 2019. They made $6.9 billion, which was a drop of 62% from the previous year. The previous year, they made about or close to $19 billion. So a huge drop in the industry because of COVID. The average ticket price is at $9.16. And so what are the two biggest revenue streams for exhibitors? That would be the box office. So their portion of the box office, whatever they made at the box office, remember, they give a portion to the distributor, but they also keep a portion of the revenue as well. Anyways, the box office consists of 66.8% of their revenue. So a big chunk of the revenue comes from the box office. The second biggest revenue stream for exhibitors is concessions. So box office number one and concessions number two. And concessions is 29.8%, or close to 30% of the revenue comes from concessions. So again, the two biggest revenue streams for exhibitors is a portion of the box office and concessions. Other revenue streams, which are small portions, are all other, so things like special events, like birthday parties being held at the venue, perhaps video games. They collect coins, special screenings like word of mouth screenings. Those are small revenue streams. I believe those encompass about 2.2%. The other 1% of the revenue, or 1.1%, is in theater advertising. So again, all other, like special events, video games, special screenings, that only encompasses 2% or 2.2% of the revenue. And in theater advertising, the ads that you see running before an actual movie, it's only 1.1%. To movie going. This is generally speaking when the distributors release their high concept movies, right? Trying to inundate the marketplace with these popular films. They usually run these movies between Memorial Day through Labor Day, these summer months. And so the second big peak is Christmas through New Year's. Now, a lot of these movies aren't necessarily going to be big box office hits. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes they're just going to be potential award winners, right? So many times distributors are going to save their best content for the end of the year. Not always, of course, but often. The other third little peak is around Thanksgiving, and I think it's because after spending, I don't know, 4 or 5 days with your family, you might get tired of them and you want to escape to a movie. So Thanksgiving is actually a little peak. President's Day is actually not as big of as a peak as you would think. The reason being is because outside of Southern California, the weather is terrible on the President's Day weekend. Fifth, which again is not a very big peak, not as big as you would think, is Easter and around spring break. Because you would think, right, the young people like to go to the movies, but yes, they do. But young people would rather go out to nightclubs or do whatever they're going to do rather than go watch a movie. So that's why spring break isn't as big of as a peak as you would think. I think because most young people go off to Hawaii or Puerto Vallarta, or maybe you go over to Vegas, which is pretty close. So the Easter and spring break are little tiny peaks, but not as big as you would think. President's Day is a little tiny peak, but not as big as you would think it'd be. Thanksgiving is kind of big. So the two real big peaks are the summer months and Christmas and New Year's. And even Labor Day, by the way, is not even that big of a peak. It's a small peak, but not a big peak in comparison to the other summer months. So in terms of moviegoers, so not surprisingly, 12 to 17-year-olds like to go to the movies, right? And the highest per capita, they go for at least almost 5 films, average almost 5 films for every person that's between that age range. And then 18 to 24-year-olds, you guys, right, 4.7. So those are the two biggest per capita attendance is 12 to 17 and then 18 to 24. And the largest ethnic group when it comes to going to the movies is Latinx. They go to 4.7 films as a whole. So as an ethnic group, they are the highest in terms of movie going. So the house nut again, I know I'm pretty sure I talked about the house nut when we were talking about film distribution, but let's go over it again. So it is a negotiated dollar amount between the distributor, and again, the distributor is the seller, and the exhibitor, who is the buyer. So these two parties negotiate with a house nut. And that is, of course, if the movie's going to be like a 90-10 minus house nut, or an 80-20 minus house nut, or a 75-25 minus house nut. So if the distributor is going to want the exhibitor to do some sort of release with the house nut in mind, it's going to be a negotiated dollar amount between, again, the distributor and the exhibitor. So it could be $10,000, it could be $15,000, it could be whatever they agree upon. It varies based off of market size. So New York obviously is going to charge you more for a house nut if you want that kind of deal than, let's say, LA. So when I used to work in distribution, right, anytime we made a deal with an exhibitor out in Manhattan, it almost always would ask for a house nut. And it was pretty significant house nut, mind you. And so again, it varies based off of market size. So New York would have the biggest house nut, generally speaking. LA would be the second highest, generally speaking. Chicago would be third, and then keep on going down. And so the house nut, what it pays for, or what it does, it pays for the exhibitor's expenses. So it pays for exhibitor expenses. So for instance, maintenance, right? So despite the fact that we still have cup holders, people still spill the soft drinks. So despite the fact that we have trash cans in movie theaters, people still spill popcorn everywhere. And so there's the need to be maintenance. People need to clean the venue, clean the theater. So that's one big part of maintenance. Of course, you have employee salaries, the overhead, other expenses that need to be paid. And so if you need to send regular, snail mail, which is now really snail mail, if you got to pay for rent, or if you got to pay for electricity. So other expenses, if you guys live on your own, you know what I'm talking about. All these other bills that come along when you're renting, or if you're lucky enough to own a house. So booking decisions. So theater type. What type of theater are we talking about? So are we talking about an art theater, a theater that's sort of a hybrid or a mix or a mainstream? So art theaters, right? We find a lot of art theaters out in Los Angeles. They typically just run art movies. If you've ever been to the ArcLight out in Hollywood is sort of a mix. It does mainstream and art films. Then of course you have your mainstream chains like an AMC. They run mostly all Hollywood stuff or mainstream stuff. And so that's going to affect the types of films that are going to be booked, right? So obviously, if you want to see an art film, you're likely to find that art film in an art theater, right, or a venue that exhibits the movies, or the ArcLights, and it does sort of a hybrid, a mix. You're not going to find it, generally speaking, in the mainstream theater. And remember, it's the most appropriate theater for both the distributor and the exhibitor. So that's critical in booking decisions. So for instance, right, an art theater buyer is not going to buy, a mainstream film, generally speaking, unless he feels or she feels that mainstream content is going to appeal to art moviegoers, which generally doesn't, because art film goers tend to be older, so generally doesn't work, and more educated, so you want different kind of content, generally speaking. Anyways, the most important decision in a booking decision is the relationship between the distributor and the seller, or I should say distributor, i.e. seller, and the buyer. So this relationship between the distributor and the buyer, the exhibitor, is clearly the most important factor in booking decisions. So what do I mean by this? So when I used to work in film distribution, right, sometimes our movie would perform better than, let's say, a Warner Brothers movie or a Sony movie, or, name another well-known exhibitor. But we would get pushed off the screen. We would lose our screen, where they would keep their screen. The reason being was because we worked for a small distributor, so they didn't really, care about us too much, but they cared about their relationship with Universal or Sony or these other bigger exhibitors, because these bigger exhibitors were giving them more content. So the exhibitor really wanted to nurture that relationship between themselves and the distributor. And so they care less about the smaller distributors. So again, the relationship between the distributor and the exhibitor, the buyer, is the most critical. Keeping this relationship, healthy, good and healthy, is immensely important for both parties, exhibitor as well as distributor. Of course, the film's quality is important in terms of getting on a screen. But again, if you have a movie from Disney, or if you have a movie from Sony or one of these big distributors, you can get a screen even if it's a bad movie, because it's Disney. So box office performance. So I'm referring to the box office performance of a genre. So genres, right, are depending on if it's a Western or a romance or rom-com, whatever it is. Some movies play well in certain areas. And so this goes back to the exhibitor telling the distributor, hey, this movie plays well here. We want to place this movie here. And so it's important for the distributor to sort of listen to the exhibitor, because the distributor has knowledge to a certain extent, but really the exhibitor is right there, right? They're like on the front line. They're the ones interacting with the customers. They're right there. They can see what's going on better than the distributor. So again, box office performance of a certain genre matters in booking a movie into certain theaters. Distributor support. So the booker, which is the theater, right, the buyer, is always going to ask, are you supporting this movie with any P&A, right? Obviously, advertising. And so for an exhibitor, it's really important, right? Because they want to know that the distributor is going to do their part in making people aware that this movie's out in the marketplace. Because the last thing you want as an exhibitor is to buy a movie or get a movie and find out the distributor has no more, they have money for P, but they don't have any money for A. And so now, nobody's going to know that this movie's in the marketplace. And so every once in a while, right, the exhibitor is going to do what they call a co-op deal, which means cooperative advertising deal with the distributor. So in other words, the exhibitor really likes the movie. The distributor tells exhibitor, we don't have that much cash. We can only do like maybe a few print ads. And so what the exhibitor will do is they'll say, well, we'll pay a little bit of the advertising, you pay a little bit of the advertising, and then you give us a bigger chunk of the box office, right? And so that's what I mean by co-op advertising. So, but again, the exhibitor, generally speaking, doesn't like to do that. So they want to know that the distributor is paying money to support the film and advertising, with advertising. So let's take a look at these couple of films and figure out whether or not you would buy them. So same sort of scenario that when I talked about selling and distribution in terms of like, do you want to do a limited release, a platform release, a saturation release? So same thing for a buyer, right? The one who's going to be buying the license. It's tricky for them to sort of watch a trailer or watch a movie and go, okay, can this work in my theater? Sometimes there's obvious yeses, and then sometimes, there's like, maybe not. Do I take a chance on it? So it gets pretty tricky. Can get tricky.
Wunderbar.
Oh, thank you.
Die Hände in die Höhe.
Arms up like this.
Huh? Happy family.
Please look into the camera. Please just smile.
Die Stöcke vielleicht in die Höhe.
He wants pulls up
He
again.
wants us to keep doing pulls up. I don't know.
Just been through a lot lately. My dad passed away.
8 months ago.
So we came here.
He's still here.
Here's to here. You lose a parent and the ticking gets louder. Every day is all we have.
We have, yep.
Powerful. Maybe we ski the beast after lunch.
Pete,
I don't think it'll be that challenging. It'll be fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
It looked like it was gonna kill us.
For a moment.
The kids were screaming because it felt like we were gonna die. Pete?
Wow.
And I look over at Pete, and he had grabbed his phone. Pete left us.
I didn't leave you to be buried.
I'm gonna win.
I ran to get help.
Yes, I'm gonna win.
That's not what happened.
I choose to survive.
I love my family.
Every day is all we have.
How could I run away in ski boots?
What?
Can you run in ski boots?
Not very well.
Boom. Exactly.
Regardless, I wouldn't leave my family to die.
That's boom.
Yes, I am prepared.
You have a right to be angry. It's black and white. Well, no, it's black and white. How old are you? 30?
I won't give in.
There's only one thing I have to worry about right now, and that's going down.
I don't understand why there weren't any warnings posted anywhere.
There was a warning.
What?
Posted at lifts, gondolas, hotel receptions, restaurants, shops, bars, soda machines, toilets.
We didn't see any of that.
Well.
So again, the question is, right, if you are buying movies for a theater, would this movie work at a mainstream theater? We have a strong cast, so yeah, maybe it would work. Would I buy this movie for an art release? Yeah, maybe, because I think this could work. It's kind of more subtle adult humor, so that might work. I might put it into one of those, either a hybrid or maybe just an art theater, and maybe in some mainstream theaters where I think is where it could work, but that would be the exhibitor telling me that they want there. So let's take a look at one more. Oh, not working.
Do you notice anything different about the soup?
Is this a quiz? If I get it right, do I get another bowl of soup?
I want you to get it right. That means what I did worked.
I'm gonna get it wrong on purpose now.
For once in your life, can you be bloody normal?
Yeah, I'm normal. Very normal.
Isn't it so? There's no blood.
Oh, we need tomato juice. I like tomato juice.
Why don't you just eat more tomatoes?
What's wrong with you?
Tom, can you come up here?
Should have left earlier. It's only a fish.
You still have to feed it.
Flush it.
Flush you. There isn't a moment I won't be there with you.
It's an ebb and a flow.
Any particular style today, madam?
Does the blue let me rest?
It suits you.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Too hot.
Tea cozy. No.
Isn't it so?
I had this feeling that if I can get through it all, it would somehow change me. I don't think it has. I don't think I want it to.
So again, great cast, pretty heavy in terms of a topic. So maybe not a mainstream film. Maybe I wouldn't put it into the bigger, AMC's or Regals, but again, sort of a hybrid, or maybe if I had art theaters, I would certainly put it in there. But again, this is more of a heavy type of film, and probably intended more for a more adult audience, I would imagine, at least based on the trailer. So these are decisions that, again, that a booker has to decide. They have legally, you must provide them with a screener or some sort of code where they can go in and watch the movie. Going back to the Paramount case, you cannot do blind bidding, right? They have to see the content they're going to purchase or rent in this case. So the last slide, we're going to talk about what a film booker does. So booker, of course, is the person who's responsible for booking theater or booking movies into theaters. And the booker is working on behalf of the exhibitor, right? And so at least when I used to work in the film industry, the booker, each booker was assigned sort of essentially a region, right? So you had, let's say, one person from AMC, and they would handle all the West Coast. Then you had somebody who would handle the Midwest and then the East Coast, or things like that. They would split up the regions. Anyways, the booker negotiates the following: the film rental. The film rental, in terms of settling, right? Film rental is how much you're going to pay the film distributor, and how much are they going to keep. So they need to settle that. Oftentimes it's settled. So they negotiate a film rental. How much are they going to pay the film distributor, right, the seller? They also negotiate with the seller's number of screens. So are you putting this movie on one screen, two screens, three screens, 4, 5? Right? How many screens are you giving this particular movie in your particular venue? What's the size of the theater in terms of capacity? Are you putting the movie in all the best theaters with the biggest capacity because you expect a lot of people to go to that particular movie? Or do you place the movie out and towards the ends, which tend to be smaller theaters with smaller capacity because you don't expect a big audience? So what's the size of the theater that you're placing the movie in? Number of showtimes that you're gonna play this particular movie. are you going to give it one showtime, two showtimes, three showtimes, etc.? Generally speaking, bookers like shorter films, right? They like a movie that's maybe 90 minutes long versus a movie that's 2 hours long, generally speaking. And what I mean by that is the reason they like it more is because they can get one extra showtime in there. So instead of just showing the movie 4 times in a day or 5, they can show it 5 or 6 times in a day, which, you get more butts, right, in the seats. So if you get more butts in the seats, it's more revenue for your venue. So that's why they like the shorter showtimes. Number of weeks, it's immensely flexible. So generally speaking, on Monday, as the distributor, you call up the booker and you ask the booker, is the film on or off? And so if they say on, they'll play it another week. If they say off, it's off on Thursday, generally speaking. So if you're dying to watch a movie, well, right now everything's closed, but if this was a regular, semester with people could go out to the movie theater, I would say, well, tomorrow's your last day to watch this movie because it might be gone tomorrow. So the number of weeks, it just really depends. It depends on how well the movie's doing. It can be political. Going back to what I was saying, sometimes the films that's performing higher than other films might get pushed off because you're a smaller distributor. It's going to go back to relationships. And number 6, the booker assigns films to theaters. So the booker, right, really, generally speaking, really knows his or her venues. And so they're going to help the distributor in terms of assigning the film to the most appropriate theater. Not always the best theater, but certainly the most appropriate. Meaning that they're going to put art films in their art venues, or a hybrid, and they're going to put their mainstream films in mainstream venues.